one of the significant events that occurred in my 5 years in San Diego was started right out of the first year I was there. In December, my father actually had died up here in Oakland, and I was allowed, for the first time, we were allowed to go to a deathbed and a funeral. This was not done for 166 years in the Society of the Sacred Heart. The reason being, I'm sure that if one nun lived in Paris and her parents died in Paris, she could go. But if her parents died in Lyon, she couldn't go because of the travel was so archaic. So I think St. Madeleine Sophie simply said nobody goes to funerals. But now with modern traffic, and the Vatican Council was definitely over in 1966, and we were beginning to activate some of these new rules, one being that you could go to a deathbed and so on. So I did that, and I was pleased, very pleased to be with my father when he died. And then I stayed at Lone Mountain College, and the last day after the funeral, I came back to the college before I flew home, and everybody in the college, all the nuns, had changed habits. We had heard, of course, this was going to happen, but I looked like a malcontent in the old habit. Everybody else was in the new habit. So I finally flew home to San Diego, and that was the time they were waiting for me to come home, because we were going to change the habit into the, what should I say, the revised new habit. Slightly shorter, ankle length. We didn't have the cap, the wimple, but we did have a veil. And it was modern for our understanding of habit. And so we did that in December, and it was quite, shocking for everybody when they came back to school in January to see all these nuns in something different. So, and then, as they say, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's very difficult to get back. And so we began to experiment with kinds of habits. The striped kind of summer habit with a veil, and then we would go in for a suit in winter. So that began to open the whole concept a little more and more, and so finally people began to experiment wearing lay clothes. And for quite a few months, if not years, we would go to the local Salvation Army or other outlets to try to find something very simple, perfect, good taste, and very cheap, because the vow of poverty was observed very strongly in our society. So that worked for some, not so much for others. So finally, people were brought in to kind of train us what the appropriate professional outfit should be for nuns and so on. So anyway, it was a very interesting time for all of us, and especially for the society, for the nuns. It really was. At this time, cloister was lifted, and superiors were loath to tell us all this because they could imagine what was going to go on. They wouldn't have control over wherever we were. So, but cloister was lifted, and when I first went down to the college in 1966, in July, I remember going across the street to mail a letter home. And I was remonstrated for that by the superior because that was out of cloister. It was on the campus, but it was outside the college and across the street, right in front of the bishop's office. So I duly took note and didn't do that again. But then by Christmas, it was definitely permissible to cross the street and mail a letter, as well as go to other parts of the campus. And so all of this merging process and the aftermath of Vatican II was very much in my experience. That's what I remember about the college, that everything was changing. When we were allowed to leave the college for other things than just educational meetings. We would go to the Old Globe. We were invited often by the owner of the Old Globe, whose name I unfortunately can't remember. And we would have dinner beforehand. People would ask what we would like to drink beforehand. And I remember my brother, who was a Jesuit, came down and we were allowed to go out for dinner. And we did. And he said, well, I'm going to take whatever it was. And I said, well, I'll take bourbon and ginger ale. And he said, Nancy, you can tell exactly the year you entered. Because in the college years I went to in University of California, Berkeley, you know, we'd have drinks once in a while, and that was the drink I would have, bourbon and ginger ale. Anyway, we had a wonderful time, but it was very strange in many respects. We were just sort of coming, it was like Rip Van Winkle coming out of a dream. And life was very changed, very changed.